So we'll start with process mining today. We have a big new feature which is called multi-process. This feature will open up a lot of new scenarios in process mining that we really couldn't do well before. The feature essentially makes it possible to break up your process in multiple smaller parts, and then you can analyze those in isolation. So it's easier to understand than looking at the whole process in one go. Now, as you're looking at these smaller parts, you can still see the effect of that smaller part on the overall end-to-end process, making it a very versatile feature. When is it useful? Well, it's useful when you have a complicated process, and anyone who's doing process mining before knows that processes tend to get complicated quite quickly if you look at all the different paths. It's also a useful feature when you have different types of objects that are interacting with each other in a process. So the most common example here is purchase to pay. We usually look at a purchase order and see how that progresses to the end of the process. But if you're in finance and you want to follow all the invoices, you're out of luck really, because a lot of invoices won't have a purchase order. Traditionally, those wouldn't show up in process mining, and now they can. And if you have a process with different types of stakeholders who are each responsible for a different part of the process, this is going to help you to cater to these different stakeholders with process mining. So if you look at a process, it easily gets into what we call a process spaghetti, hard to analyze. So in multi-process, you can focus on a smaller part, which is much easier to analyze. And if you see issues in the beginning of the process, you can now see how that affects the downstream of the process. With this feature, you can basically load any subset of events in your process mining or different versions of that. An example of this is an incident management process that we did look into with one of our customers last week. When they added all the updates to their incident tickets, the process became a complete mess. So what we ended up doing is loading one process with just the basic milestones, the statuses of the ticket, which was easy to analyze, but then also all of the updates, so you could filter on those, getting the best of both worlds, really. So let me show you how that looks in our product. So in here, I have a lead to order process. And we have a lot of opportunities, 200,000 of them. And most opportunities don't, or there's only a small amount which gets a quote, 15%, and then for 10%, eventually there's an order that's booked. The customer here was just introducing a new contracting system, so a small part of these actually have steps to create a contract, but they get lost in the overall process. So what we ended up doing is loading the contracting part of the process as a separate process graph. And you can immediately see that it's a lot cleaner and easier to figure out what are bottlenecks, what are some weird things going on with the process, so you can optimize that part. So that allowed the customer to step-by-step optimize the contracting process. But if you want to know how certain steps in your initial process affect the whole, you can simply filter on it, and we'll filter the rest of the data. And you can look at, hey, if this step happens in the beginning, how does that affect everything else in my process? So everything is still connected in the background. What's also possible is to create different sets of views for different teams. So here the sales teams obviously is invested more in a different part of the process, the steps they are responsible for, and I can create that view for them to just show what's important to them. So it makes it possible for multiple teams to cooperate or to use one process mining app to monitor their contributions to the process. The way this is defined is in the data management or the data transformation part of the process mining product. And it's actually a bit easier to set up than traditional process mining. So here I'll go to the data model tab. And usually before we required you to create one big event log with all of the tables joined together in the right way to do process mining, which was quite complicated actually. Now it's a lot more straightforward because you essentially upload all your objects, the things your process interacts with. So with this process, that's my quotes, my opportunities, orders, and contracts, and I set up how they are related. And then the next step is essentially to load your event tables. And I have a set of records here with all my approved quote events that you can see here. I have a set of records with my review quotes, with the create quote events, and so on. And each of those records connects to a specific quote ID. So I link it to the quote. I do the same for the orders. My order events are linked to the orders, contract events, opportunity events, and all of that makes up my data model. And the next step is to go to the processes tab, which is a new tab in our product. And there you define which processes you actually want to load in the product. So you give your process a name. You decide which of the objects you want to follow through that process. So you can follow whichever you want. And then decide which events to load. So you can create any subset of events that way. And finally, you choose what kind of mining you want, if you want traditional process mining, or if you want to use a BPMN model to project it on. Once you've defined this, these processes will load into your app. You press apply to dashboards, just like the normal transformations to load it in your dashboards. And then in your dashboards, you can simply select which process you want to look at. So here I'm looking at the contracts process. If I switch it to the contracts modeled process, it switches around to the other one. So it's really easy to use in your dashboards afterwards. And that's basically the feature. So in short, multi-process allows you to break up your process in smaller bits, making it much easier to analyze those smaller parts while still being able to analyze the whole end-to-end process. And that way you can cater views to specific stakeholders of your process in your process mining app. So that's everything for process mining.